tell us a little bit more about the situation in Afghanistan and also the plight of evacuees. We're now joined by Hassan Choonara, who's the Regional Director of Africa Muslim Agency. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us this evening, Peter.
I believe that you were in Afghanistan recently. Tell us what you saw there.
Yes, of course, the organization Africa Muslim Agency has been active in Afghanistan for the past number of years. And myself had the honor and privilege of going to Afghanistan, like you mentioned, just a few months ago. What we witnessed, Peter, was already prior to the situation of last week or 2 weeks ago, already 4 decades of conflict has resulted in massive poverty, where half of Afghanistan's population is children. And sadly to say that many homes and many of the families that live on the mountains of Kabul are led by orphans or widows and people fending for their lives on a daily basis, where you find young children, especially orphans, Peter, some of them 6 years, 7 years or 8 years, having to walk down a mountain and walk the streets of Kabul and sell items to pay the rent and obviously to put food on the table. And today's day and age, Peter, at 6 and 7 years old, I don't think that's right. But we want to stress and advise the viewers that the situation, the humanitarian situation that I witnessed a few months ago, and that is being there because of 4 decades of conflict, and has been there for a number of years, as not only a result, or not just a result of the events of last week, but has been there for some time.
And that's what I was about to ask you, is that what do the locals blame their situation on? Is there anyone in particular, or is it just that this country has been fighting itself in many ways?
Exactly that, the latter part of what you just mentioned, Peter. If you think about 4 decades of conflict, Peter, the country completely ravaged after war. People and children have been born in a war situation, and all they know is that conflict in the country, nothing else but that. And when a country has been ravaged by conflict over 4 decades, people having to leave their villages from the outskirts in different areas of Kandahar and other areas and come to Kabul for refuge, overburdening a already challenging city, dealing with many issues. You find this hard reality and a hard situation of many homes that are widow-led or orphan-led. And what I mean by that, an entire generation has been completely wiped out because of 4 decades of conflict. Most of the men have either lost their lives, whether they were collateral damage because of the conflict, perhaps they're working in the streets and part of collateral damage because of an event that's taken place. And the hard reality is that the women and children are the ones now in vulnerable situations and facing the difficulty of moving on.
Whilst you were there, the Taliban hadn't taken control of Kabul, but they had taken control of large parts of the country. I wonder, whilst you were there, what sense did you get about the Taliban and what they're trying to do in the country?
Well, I suppose, Peter, it's who you ask. I suppose who you ask. You get people who are obviously who speak for the change, and you'll get people who are, who was okay with the status quo. The sense I got from the community and the people of Afghanistan was obviously one of just wanting peace. There's no really accepting one group or the other. All the people of Afghanistan want is peace, and just a right to get a chance to education and a right to live, and a right not to to live in fear, and just have peace, and no real support of one or the other. And likewise, as Africa Muslim Agency, as a humanitarian organization, we focus solely on the humanitarian aspect and assisting the people on the ground, and not really pandering to one side or the other, but more to focus on the challenges that we see on the ground before us, the families we interact with, the situation we see, and try to remedy that situation by empowering people's lives, whether it be through the orphan project, whether it be through the boreholes that we build on the ground, whether it be through the bakeries that we empower families and also provide bread for impoverished communities, or the general assistance that we give to families on a daily basis.
I know that your work really focuses on the humanitarian aspect of what's going on in the country, but sadly, politics does play a role. And I just wonder, the Taliban is talking about forming an inclusive government. Are you optimistic that this government can bring peace and allow people like you to do the humanitarian work that's so badly needed?
Well, as humanitarians, Peter, obviously we pray that we can continue the work unhindered in many ways. At the moment, obviously, some of the work is still continuing. And like the world is watching Afghanistan, we are also watching Afghanistan. We have teams in Afghanistan. And just a few moments ago, talking to them and monitoring day by day. And we just pray that we're able to serve the people on the ground. We pray that whoever is there and whoever is coming in, whether it's an inclusive government or whatever decisions are then taken over the next few days, will be one that will, where people on the ground, the people of Afghanistan, the orphans, the children, the widows, the mothers, the elderly, people who've traveled hundreds of kilometers from villages, who are now living on the mountains of Kabul, who are living in these squalid conditions, where they can live in peace and be able to be alleviated from their situation, irrespective of who's on the ground, and that people are able to enjoy that freedom of living a normal life in Afghanistan.
I know that one of the pillars of Islam is charity and looking after the vulnerable and the needy. And sadly, again, we find religion being mixed up in politics. What fears do you have, if any, about the brand of Sharia law that the Taliban might be wanting to introduce, and how that might affect some vulnerable groups?
Again, I suppose it's who you ask and how people interpret the different laws of Islam or Sharia and how they portray to society. It's not our job to go and say who's right, who's wrong. And yes, you're correct. Islam, one of the 5 pillars of Islam is to give charity. It's a term that we call zakah, which is obligatory on every Muslim person to give a percentage of the wealth if they have the means. And this obviously assists people who are in need across the globe. And this zakah, this charity, obviously benefits people who are living in difficult conditions. And it's this concept of help thy neighbor. If each person were able to help their neighbor, we would never have communities who are in need. And obviously, like I said before, you mentioned about the Sharia law. We talk about Islam, we talk about giving, about being, from one humanity's heart to another humanity's heart, just to empower people. But I want to say also, Peter, that the organization doesn't only focus on Muslim people. Yes, this is Afghanistan, obviously a predominantly Muslim nation, and most of the beneficiaries are Muslim, but we assist Muslims and non-Muslims, whether it be in Afghanistan or any other part of the world where we are working. And that's our plea to all donors out there to continue supporting that work. But like coming back to your question, we hope for peace. We hope for a life of normality. And we hope that people are able to live a life of dignity. And some of the images you can see on screen, this was taken by our teams perhaps a few days ago. And, you can see most of the people who are affected, Peter, are the women and children. Peter, how do you put a value when you're sitting with a family on top of a mountain, bitterly cold, in a perhaps 3 by 3 meter room, and there's a young boy by the name of Yusuf, perhaps 6 years old, and he walks down a mountain 50 minutes every day, and all he does is sells packets. And why he sells packets, Peter? Because he earns whatever little currency to bring back to his mom, to protect the dignity of his mother, to pay the rent, and to pay the food. Else, if that's not done, sometimes, and sadly to say, Peter, that the women are abused in order for this, to pay for food or pay for their rental.
So we've seen Uganda, it's a country that's led in terms of taking in refugees, taking in Afghans that have been evacuated. Would you like to see more African countries, including South Africa, taking in some of these evacuees, people that want to leave Afghanistan?
Well, Peter, when taking people out of their country, we are going to create we're going to create displaced camps in different parts of the world, and we've seen that happen in so many parts. Examples of, for example, Serbia, Yemen, and we could go on and list the countries where people have vacated or left their countries and went to other countries seeking assistance, and then end up. I mean, Africa has. You look at about the northeast part of Kenya, and the camp set up there between Kenya and Somalia. You look at Darfur and the refugee camps there. And we don't want to create similar scenarios. Right now, there is infrastructure in Afghanistan in terms of organizations who are active on the ground, who know the terrain. And there are people who are wanting to get out of Afghanistan, and they have their choice and they have their right to do so. And if they want, they should go. Also, there's also people in Afghanistan who want to be part of their country, who want to be part of the solution, who want to be part of the future of Afghanistan and play a part. And they also have the right to remain. And organizations like Africa Muslims Agency, not only Africa Muslims Agency, there are many other organizations actively working on the ground. And I think to support these kind of infrastructures who are already serving humanity on the ground, that's, to evacuate is a more cumbersome process, but to empower organizations who are already on the ground, who have already identified the families, who know what the challenges are, who know what the needs are, and who are able to deliver on this humanitarian causes holistically and sustainably. I think that's also another option we should consider.
Hassan Choonara, Regional Director of Africa Muslims Agency, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we wish you well with the great work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Peter.
All right, so that's a story that talks about the Afghans that are fleeing the country at this time, many staying and hoping for peace, as many vulnerable, particularly women and children, have for decades already been under and facing great challenges.